Blog Talk Radio.
From New England and the studios at UN Prime, it's Today's Author, airing live on Blog Talk Radio. My name is David Ewan. You can also watch us on WVTA television on the web. And I got to tell you, my wife and I, we enjoy taking a nice walk every once in a while. And we ask people where they've gone for a nice, fantastic walk. Where's a good place to go for a walk? Well, on Today's Author, our guest will most likely say, I think my best walk was on the moon. Well, Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell did just that. It was in 1971 that Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell was returning to Earth from the moon. As this mission was ending, another exploration was just beginning. This is what we're going to talk about today on our show. On this edition of Today's Author, we will talk about his book, The Way of the Explorer. It's an Apollo astronaut's journey through material and mystical worlds. His website is www.edmitchellapollo14.com. That's the number 14. Again, that's www.edmitchellapollo14.com. Everyone, let's give Dr. Mitchell a warm thank you for being on the program. Doctor, it's good to have you in the program, and I'm just very excited to talk about your book, The Way of the Explorer, an Apollo astronaut's journey through the material and mystical world.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. And you wrote a book about an experience coming back from the moon in 1971. First of all, let's talk about your experience on Apollo 14 back in 1971 and what you did there.
Well, if you're referring, of course, to the experience coming home, that was after my work was primarily done, since I was a lunar module pilot, and my responsibilities were the lunar spacecraft and the lunar surface activities. And with all that completed, I had a little more time than my companions to look out the window and gawk at the heavens and see the panorama of the Earth, the moon, and the sun in a 360-degree vision of the planets and the star systems. And I realized from my days at Harvard and MIT getting my doctorate that the molecules in my body and the molecules in the body of the spacecraft and my partner's bodies were created in some ancient generation of stars. And suddenly, instead of intellectual knowing, it was a deep visceral thing, and I'd never experienced that before, accompanied by an excitement, an ecstasy, a wow. And I didn't know what that meant. I'd never experienced that. And this continued all the way home for 3 days when I wasn't really working, and I had a chance to be a tourist and look out the window.
So when you came back, you had this experience that you just shared with us, and then you made a decision to say, I'm going to study this further.
That's exactly right. And I looked at all the science literature and found nothing, and then the religious literature and found nothing. And I elicited some help from a nearby university, some scholars there at Rice University in Houston, and asked them to help me find out what this was all about. And very shortly they came back to me with a description out of the ancient Sanskrit, 5,000 years ago, that was called Salvakapa Samadhi. That was the name of it in the Sanskrit. And what it meant was that you see things as we see them with our eyes, but you experience them viscerally and internally and emotionally as a connectedness, a oneness, accompanied by bliss and ecstasy. And I said, when they described it, I said, well, that's exactly it. Wow, I never knew what that was or what it meant. And that spurred me to start looking at other cultures, and I found that throughout all of the mystical and spiritual cultures in the world that I was able to investigate. I talked to shamans, kahuna, witch doctors, medicine men from the various ancient traditions. And somewhere there was similar type of experiences recorded in the lore of all cultures. And so the question as a scientist, as I consider myself, okay, what does modern science have to say about this? And we found nothing. And the idea was here that this is a fundamental aspect of consciousness, which science has avoided for 400 years, since the philosopher René Descartes, back in the late 16th, early 17th century, declared that body, mind, physicality, spirituality were two different realms of reality that never met. And the good part of that was it got the Inquisition of the time off the intellectuals of the Western and the European world. But for 400 years now, science has refused to look, at least in the deep basic science, has refused to look at the question of mind and consciousness for all this period. Until the 20th century, when the beginning in the early days quantum mechanics was formulated, and it became fairly obvious at that point that there was something wrong with this Cartesian concept that body-mind didn't interact in that way. And so today we find that maturing in that the concept of using the tools of science to study consciousness is starting to become important in the academic and the world of science.
And Doctor, you founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences. What is that, and is that related to the study of consciousness?
Of course. I did found the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and that word noetic comes right out of, it's the English translation out of the Greek word nous, N-O-U-S, meaning pertaining to mind and how we apprehend information. So we named this organization back 36 years ago, Institute of Noetic Sciences, to imply our work in looking at these aspects of our subjective experience, how we apprehend information.
And what are the daily activities or the function of this institute?
Well, in the very beginnings, we were looking at the anomalous, as all science does at times, look at anomalous phenomena and try to explain it in known terms. And so we were looking at the so-called paranormal, or the psychic event, and epitomized by folk like Uri Geller and healers and Tibetan shamans, people who seem to have power and capability that simply could not be explained within classical science. And to make a long story short, we now understand that this is a quantum phenomenon, even though that's been resisted for 80 years of quantum mechanics. It turns out that the formalism and mechanisms related to quantum mechanics are very vital to this type of functioning.
Now, Doctor, we're talking about how this evolved from your space flight, returning back from the moon to the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Had you not had that experience, had you not gone to the moon, would you have gone through this study?
Well, perhaps not with the passion and the interest that I really did go through with it. The point was that I was interested in these phenomena before I went, and I had done some study with Dr. J.B. Ryan and some of the other early scientists who had studied these phenomena, so it was of a passing interest to me. But then after this experience in space, and I realized that, well, this experience in space, let's talk about it as the big picture. And I realized that being the first generation of spacefaring humans, and that humans forever had asked the question, who are we, how do we get here, and what's this universe all about? What's our relationship to it? And I thought that maybe as a first-generation spacefaring person, that maybe we ought to re-ask these deep questions about our relationship to the cosmos and look at it in a new way, because likely our science was incomplete and perhaps flawed, and our cultural traditions, our cultural cosmologies, rooted mostly in religion, were archaic and perhaps flawed. And so maybe in this day and age, as a first-generation spacefarer, it would be interesting to look at those deep questions. And so that was the kind of genesis of this whole effort for the last 30 years.
And about the last 30 years, that's how this book came about, The Way of the Explorer. What should readers expect when they read the book?
Well, I start out there describing the getting ready to go to the moon, my early childhood. It's autobiographical for first chapter or two. Looking at that, then getting ready to go to the moon, then my flight experience in the Korean War, and then getting into the astronaut corps and the flight to the moon. And then the last part of the book is the work that I have done since then in the noetic world and in the science and the study of consciousness, and some of the more recent things that have been discovered, and a very important breakthrough work called quantum holography, based upon what's also called a dyadic model, as different from a dualism. I won't go into those terms, read the book. But that's what the last part of the book is about. So it's autobiographical and going to the moon in the first part, and science and noetical in the second part.
For someone who's not familiar with noetic sciences or a discussion of an intelligent universe, what's the style of writing that a reader should expect?
Well, the folks that have read my work, and particularly this book, think it's well written for the layperson. It's people are quite amazed at such material, as this is often technical. However, it is very lucid and readable. And I've been congratulated quite frequently by reviewers and pundits on how well this book reads. And I can thank my Mr. Dwight Williams, who was a co-writer with me on the first edition, for putting the oil of good literature into it. He did a wonderful job.
In the latest release of this book, The Way of the Explorer, the revised edition, I'm just going to read to our listening audience what Wayne Dwyer says. Okay. He's the author of The Power of Intention. It's Edgar Mitchell has produced a miraculous book. He writes as both a scientist and spiritual seeker. In sharing from his heart, Dr. Mitchell has provided us with a blueprint for revolutionizing our lives and our planet. And then also from Larry Dossey, Dr. Larry Dossey. He's the best-selling author of Healing Words. In the history of the human race, 12 people have set foot on the moon. Now one of them has written an important book, an account of a modern-day hero's journey. Like the mythical heroes of legend, Astronaut Mitchell pursued a vision, ventured on a quest, risked a greater danger, and obtained uncommon wisdom. Now he, like the greatest of heroes, has returned to share it. We would be wise to listen. And I'm going to read that again. We would be wise to listen. Do you get that a lot from people?
Well, those two gentlemen, Dr. Dossey and Dwyer's, those are wonderful accolades, and I deeply appreciate their thinking. And many people do get a lot out of this book when they read it. They do enjoy it. I do appreciate their endorsements.
Dr. Mitchell, I want to thank you for being on today's Author, live on Blog Talk Radio, and will be seen later on WVTA television.
Thank you very much, David. It's been a pleasure being with you.
Thank you so much. My guest today has been Dr. Edgar Mitchell. He's the Apollo 14 astronaut who has written the book, The Way of the Explorer. It's an Apollo astronaut's journey through material and mystical worlds. And his website is www.edmitchellapollo14.com. Mitchell is spelled Mitchell. Just want to let you know that it has two L's. So it's www.edmitchellapollo14.com. And I appreciate the doctor joining us today. My name is David Ewan. This is today's Author. We're airing live on Blog Talk Radio, and we can be seen on WVTA television on the web.